We own brands like Genius, the music knowledge company, and Imager. Acquired a couple years ago by MediaLab. And I'm joined here by Deanna and Julia. Would you ladies like to introduce yourselves?
Sure, this is a good test. Oh, it's working. Great. My name's Julia Fitzgerald. I'm here with Build-A-Bear, and I'm the CMO there. And Build-A-Bear is a vertically integrated retailer. And quick show of hands, if somebody here has been to a Build-A-Bear as a child or a parent. All right, so you understand what we do. I'll hand it over to you.
Yeah, I was just there last week, actually, getting there's a Peep Build-A-Bears.
Easter.
Yes. Hi, everyone. Deanna Hernandez. I am a field marketing officer at McDonald's, primarily in charge of the Midwest region. So think of Illinois and all the states that border us. I lead about $6 billion in sales, about 2,000 restaurants, and really want to infuse strong marketing across the Midwest.
That's it? That's a lot. That's it?
That's it. That's all.
So we're breaking this out into a couple sections, but first we want to get a little into the brands and give everyone a peek behind the curtain, and then we'll get into a little bit of the women's leadership and the roles and authenticity and all the good stuff. So Julia, Build-A-Bear has been on a very transformative path. The founder of Build-A-Bear really set the stage for what experiential retail looked like. It is no longer just a kids brand. We'd love for you to tell us a little bit about maybe not so much the rebrand because it's coming, but the path to what that looks like, and how you sort of think about this addressable market as being much larger than what it was.
Great, and I love following the conversation about brand love, because when you think about Build-A-Bear, I've been with the organization for about a year, and when I tell people I'm with this organization, they have a story. Everyone has a story. It is a beloved brand. And it's also about a 25-year-old brand. So for those who have been with legacy brands, you understand kind of what happens. It starts to look like a collection of the ideas that were really good at one point in time. But when you collect them all together, they're not really telling the story. But we had a change in our story, in our brand story. And it's, as it always happens, it's rooted in the customer, in the guest. And we were starting to notice, especially around the pandemic, that we were seeing a change in who was buying our furry friends. And so since you guys all have been to Build-A-Bear, you know that when you buy and create your own furry friend, you come up and you make a birth certificate. A great thing about being a retailer is you have amazing first-party data. As you fill out that birth certificate, we know the age of the recipient of that friend. So going into 22, at the end of that year, we were like, wow, look at this. Look who is receiving these. 40% of our furry friends were going to tweens, teens, and adults. Have you heard of the term kidulting? It's when adults say, I'm still going to have fun. I'm going to have my toys. I'm going to have my puzzles. I'm going to have my Build-A-Bear. So when you look at this and you think about our business, if your business is built around our core, which was kids 2 to 8 or 9, about 4 million kids are born every year, and then they age out, so you have a leaky bucket. When all of a sudden your data points out, hey, Gen Z just jumped in the party, you're like, wow, this is a marketer's dream. And all of you as marketers know that the next thing you need to do is figure out, how do I keep this from being a pandemic fluke? How do I reach out to this segment and make sure ongoing they know this brand and these experiences are for you? And that's when the brand marketing comes in. We did, and I was listening to Jess, and I'm thinking, all that great brand work. You look at what is our brand belief system? You go through and you look at your mission statement. Our mission statement is to add a little more heart to life. Check, that's still there. But we started saying, what is the core essence of how we come together and how we collate and correlate our messaging so that it works for all of our brand segments? And through that brand work, we came up with the idea of the good stuff. Pun intended. Let me tell you, when you work for Build-A-Bear, there's bear puns everywhere. But this is a very intentional, the good stuff. Because the good stuff works for a preschooler, it works for a high schooler, it works for a 20-something who really just wants to go to sleep with a bear that looks just like her. It works across the board. So then the good work starts to happen. And you say, how far can we take this brand, staying true to the essentials of adding a little more heart to life and being the good stuff? And how can I stretch this so that I am more inclusive of my Gen Zers? And that's where it's a lot of fun. So, of course, you do the audit. You look at your content. You look what's in the stores. And you're like, oh, man, there's a lot of little kids in here. And the trick is, and we probably have all been in this as brand marketers, you can't alienate your base, right? You want to add on another segment, but you don't want to alienate your base. So with that in mind, we started to build the brand guidelines. And I can't see these screens. Could we have that one slide? I'm going to save you all of the pain and the time and keep this to 5 minutes, but this kind of gives you a little bit of an idea. We started at the top. Let's take the corporate brand and go from something that's it's all about the teddy bear, and zoom in where it's all about the fun and the love and the heart. So this is a little bit more addressable for the total addressable market, right? Or it's acceptable for the total addressable market. But when you start thinking like a marketer and you see that new corporate mark, you can think of new businesses that ladder up to that. So it really expands our ability to, at the top of the branding architecture, you can add on new segments. But let's go back to the total addressable market just for a second. You can imagine with this new, fresher look that is also a little more premium, not luxury, premium, you have a little more space. So we started working in a little at a time. But if you're going to go and you're really trying to impact Gen Z, your first stop is your socials, right? So this work is ongoing. We've been doing the behind the scenes all year, but we're like, let's start with the socials. And oh my gosh, that Heinz stuff, I was just like clapping and yahooing. That was amazing work. So with a much smaller team, we started talking to Gen Z. We stopped just putting out ads for sales. We stopped trying just to only promote the birthday parties. And we started putting out fun things like our axolotl in a goth wig and say, it's not a Halloween costume, it's a lifestyle. And we started just doing things like leaning into our bear cave, which is something we only do online, and it's just a little bit edgier. And we started working with influencer agencies and creators who were able to connect with a Gen Z audience. And while all the other good hard work was going on, you know, with your socials, you can tap in pretty quickly. You can see what's happening to your engagement rates. They went up like 168%. Our social following went up dramatically. And we looked, and after just a few months, 70% of our following was Gen Z. So our core mom, or our core customer used to be moms with kids 2 to 7. We have not alienated her. But I think it's been a pretty successful round. And I'll invite you to, right after Easter, when all the stores change, go back into the stores and watch your socials and watch your digital advertising, and you will see the big brand campaign launch that relates back to the good stuff. And you'll see it, and you're like, hey, I do belong at Build-A-Bear. We can all come in there and be creative and get in touch with ourselves and put a little more heart into life.
I love that. And we'll talk a little bit more about how you can pull those pieces together, right? Because getting to the final work, and we talked about this in the last panel, right? Like, how do you avoid the boardroom, make quick decisions, not let perfection get in the way of good, to make sure that you're actually going somewhere? So we can talk about that in our leadership conversation. Deanna, working for the largest fast food chain, in field marketing. There was a great, your CEO said something which really, stuck with me, which is accelerating the arches is the strategy. Feel good moments, easy for everyone, but also the idea of increasing loyalty members by 100 million this year, which is no small feat, but you have one of the largest loyalty programs. Talk to us a little bit about how your role in driving this plan and how you sort of wrangle local and national markets and, of course, the many stores that you oversee.
Yeah, of course, of course. So I think it starts with that mission of feel good moments for everyone. And I love that we've been talking about brand love all mornings. I think it echoes some of that. You talked about Build-A-Bear having a story, or everyone having a Build-A-Bear story. I think everyone has a McDonald's story, whether it's going with your grandma, whether it's going after those soccer games or football games. Like, we all have those feel-good moments for McDonald's. McDonald's serves almost 90% of consumers every year in the US, and so we want to continue to have that connection with our consumers. From a field marketing perspective, my job is marrying that national marketing and local marketing to amplify those experiences, to make them feel good moments every time you come in. So, from a national perspective, last year and this year, we launched our Best Burger initiative. So everyone loves our Big Macs and QPCs, but we made them crisper, tighter, a little bit juicier, cooking the onion in the meat, having the cheese melt. And so now we're amplifying that national messaging in our local stores. Locally, we really want to make sure we're relevant to our consumers. And so leading the Midwest, I have anyone here from Detroit and Michigan today. Yesterday was 313 Day, which is a big day in Detroit, especially in African American communities, where they celebrate 313. That's their area code. They're proud of it. They're proud to be in Detroit. So we had local experiences in our stores. We had merch. We had lots of other layers that really amplify that local experience. So when I think about my role, it's amplifying national, but also that touch of local to ensure that we are making those feel-good moments happen every single time, whatever works for you.
Incredible. Maybe just to double click into that a little bit, we talked a little bit about, again, process and getting people on board and making the outcomes feel good to the consumers. And the Detroit example, right? A lot of Genius, we talk a lot about authenticity and storytelling in a way that makes people feel seen. How do you, what does that look like for you on the day-to-day? If we had to peel back the onion layers of Deanna's day, how do you do that? That's a big effort.
Yeah, and I think it goes back to where Julia kind of mentioned, is that data and insights, right? We have, as you mentioned, one of the largest loyalty programs across QSR in the industry. And so it's using that data to infuse our insights. So we think about what is relevant to our consumers, how are they shopping, what products are they buying, especially from a segment perspective. We can see how different segments shop very differently. And so you use all that data and insights to really infuse how you go to market, how you talk to your consumers. I think as brand marketers here, we all want to get as relevant as possible. And so how do we get as close to one-to-one as possible? So we're talking to Julia differently than we're talking to Jackie. And so from a local marketing perspective, we use some of that data as well in our media buys, socials, et cetera, to ensure we have the right message for the right consumer.
Yeah. Well, speaking of, speaking to people and managing things, as women leaders and as women who have quite large remits, let's talk a little bit about just the stories, right? So maybe Deanna, let's start with you. Can you share with the room, your journey and how you landed where you are? There's always moments of, how we feel about who we are. Sometimes we self-select out of things as women leaders. Tell us a little bit about your story and your journey to where you are today.
Yeah, happy to. So I like where you hit on self-sabotage or self-selecting out, because I think, and Julia, feel free to chime in here as well, even as you aspire to these large levels or higher levels of organizations, I feel like that self-doubt is always there. I've talked to leaders at the highest levels, and they still have that voice on their shoulder being like, are you sure? Do you belong, et cetera? And so I want to caveat that, even as far as you go, that voice will always be there. And I think it's a piece about how do you calm that voice, or how do you, pivot against it. I think for me, two things that have worked well as I've ascended in my career is leading with authenticity and inclusivity. And so what I mean by that is, trying to be as authentically possible to myself as I can. And this has come like over time. So like when I think about where I started and where I am, like I wasn't this comfortable in my early 20s, but come here, you know, I feel much more authentic now. And it's small things of like, I think for myself, like I wear my big gold hoops every time I present, and it makes me feel like myself. It is true to my culture, it's who I am. And so some might be like, that's not professional, but this is who I am. So I'm gonna wear my big gold hoops every single time. When I think about inclusivity, it's even small things as I've grown, the language that I use. And so, for example, when I'm in a room, I usually address the group as, hey team, hey crew. Like, hey crew, what are we doing today? Or, you know, hey team, what happened this weekend? And so I think that language helps, again, provide a collaborative energy and helps kind of diffuse the layers that you might have in an organization. We're all in this together. And I think that has really helped me as I've grown in my career. Even as you're ascending, you're still feeling and acting like part of the team and not above the team. And I think that goes so far as you grow in your career.
Yeah, we actually talked a little bit about that when we first arrived, right? I was giving I worked at the Wall Street Journal for a very long time, and I didn't understand how to be my authentic self. And it wasn't until I got older and wiser that I knew that if I showed up as who I am, I actually can gain the respect of the room in a much different way. It's not about how I look, it's about what I'm saying.
No, I would agree with that. So Build-A-Bear is woman-founded, and a lot of women work there. Prior to that, I was at American Lung Association. I would say that was about 80% female. The other 20 years of my career, not so much. It was very heavily male-dominated. So when it comes to the holding yourself back, I didn't see that as much, but when I was reading the question about the imposter syndrome, I'm like, oh yeah, because there used to be, more so than I think there is today, a cookie cutter. And I didn't really fit that cookie cutter. For one, I wasn't stern enough. Like, I wasn't taking everything seriously. I didn't always like approach things like, I don't know. I was just me, back to that authenticity. And when it comes to leadership, there's kind of three directions of it. You manage down to your team. I think that's easy. They kind of have to do what you say, right? You have to really manage across with your peers so that you can get things done together. And then you have to manage up. I found that being yourself is almost always a winner with the people who you are managing. I think it gets trickier when you're trying to figure out your peers. Like, what did they show up with? What did they expect from you? How can you help together get to where you want to go? And I think that's a little bit more of uncharted territory on how to get good at that quickly. Because, you show up as peers. So I think that's where the really interesting work with leadership's being done. But I agree with you, if you're your authentic self, if you can laugh with your team, if you can make the best of every situation and keep your creative juices flowing, like every team prefers to work that way, I think.
Yeah, and I think the one thing to add is you made me think, Julia, is, as you think about your career, your authentic self, how you want to grow, I think one tool that I've used really that's helped me in my journey is to think about my career as almost like a business. And so what I mean by that is having a personal mission, having a personal vision, and what are the KPIs that I'm tracking every year against that. And having that foundation, I think, has served me really well of like, as long as I'm making progress towards that, as long as I'm still true to my mission, I'm growing, I'm evolving, I'm getting better. And so having that, I think, has been really helpful as you think about how you manage up, down, across, but that foundation has served me well.
I love that. So that's really like a tactic and a tool that you use. Out of curiosity and for the room, how do you implement that? How does one set their own business plan and then follow it?
Good question, Jackie. And so I usually do this on an annual basis. So again, similar to company planning, right? What are my KPIs this year? What do I want to achieve? What's my 3-year, 5-year vision? I think about that, again, usually around January, right? New Year's resolutions, your goal setting, et cetera. But I think, for me, every year you're tracking those KPIs, you're making progress, or you might be like, let me restart and think of my 5-year plan a little differently. I want to pivot, I've learned, I've grown, I've thought about X, Y, Z. But it's an annual kind of planning resource for me. And I would say in the last 10 years, like my mission hasn't changed. My mission is to see more women in leadership, more women like me on these stages. And so as long as every day, if it's mentoring, sponsoring, whatever that looks like, looking at resumes, if I'm making progress and I'm hitting those KPIs, then I'm winning. Good.
Likewise, I love that personal goal. I have not done it that specifically for myself, but I did just recently promote my husband to chief of staff, and I do give him an annual review on how he's doing. So,
I love that.
he does not.
I love that. Oh my goodness. So let's talk a little bit about, again, being a woman in leadership comes with its ups and downs. I am actually there's one other woman leader in my company now, but for a while I was the only one. Talk to us about biases that you have encountered or how you've navigated them, or even how you mentor. We talked a little bit about mentorship. How do you mentor other women to navigate them, to make sure that they're getting the best out of themselves and also giving the best of the company they're working for?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and I'll start with this one. And I'm going, well, actually, even in companies where you have a lot of women, I think the biases, you can trace that back and say you cannot control how other people show up and what they do. You can only control how you react to it. And even when I'm seeing my staff maybe struggling with this or trying to understand how to navigate, that's my first piece, because you don't always know. You might be interpreting something, or you might be 100% sure that you're being slighted, dissed, marginalized. But what you do about it, and going home and losing sleep about it, is just not good for anybody. So I counsel them to talk about it, use the company resources, and when possible, find the language that they're comfortable with to talk to the work partner where there's some dissonance. And that used to be really hard to do, but I do find that in work, people are much more open to just like a good dialogue.
I think it depends on the environment, but yes, I believe so as well.
Yeah, and I think for me, there's, to build on what Julia mentioned, two things that come to mind. One is, making sure that you're calling out the biases in and out of the room. So what I mean by that is, again, we've all been in talent calibration meetings or things like that, but when you hear, and I've had an example in my past where there was a lot of women being discussed, and it was like, she lacks confidence, and this came up a couple of times, right? And it was like, is it confidence or is it presence? Or are there other biases that are present in this conversation? And so being vulnerable and confident in speaking out, I think is helpful for yourself and for the other women on the team in the building. And then we talked about mentoring and coaching. And so I think being very vulnerable there of like, hey, I do see this opportunity for you, having that safe space and that dialogue can go a really long way. Sometimes a lot of us are really challenged at having those difficult conversations. They feel awkward. They're like, I don't want to talk about this, but you're almost doing a disservice to yourself and to the people that you're helping if you're not willing to have those open, honest conversations. So take that leap of faith and know that, again, it's not only it's helping them, but it's helping you be a better leader as well.
And tying this back to the very beginning, which is loving yourself and loving your brand. I think being able, if you're in senior leadership, your primary job is to enable everybody who works for you. Like my job is to make sure that everyone on the team is reaching their potential and they feel like they are vested and that they're seen, and we're going to help them get to wherever they're personally headed. And giving tools like this, that helps the whole team get to where they're going and feel motivated, seen, and part of a community.
Also makes you an effective leader. I get the 2 minutes now, woof. Okay, let's do a quick closing, then we can open up for maybe one question. Advice to the room. If you had to give one piece of advice to all the amazing leaders out here, of all genders, tell us what you would give them.
Yeah. Well, I think my one piece of advice I mentioned earlier is to think about, again, your mission, your vision, have your personal plan. I think that serves you well. But since I said that already, I think my second one is like a tip that I use every day, whether you're female or male. If you're not feeling yourself, you're not feeling confident, if you're not feeling like you can show up, my go-to tip is to think about, like, what would someone do that I admire? So mine is like, what would Michelle Obama do in this room? If I'm not feeling myself and I need to get up the courage to speak up, to do whatever, I go in there. Well, I play my Beyonce beforehand. And then you walk in there and you're like, I'm going to channel Michelle Obama today. And whatever comes at me, that's how I'm going to show up in this room. So think about what yours is.
Since this is a room full of marketers and we frequently work on very complicated and longer and bigger campaigns and work, I would say we talked about this adage before, and that is, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. So look at the team, look at the work before you, and find ways to tell yourself to take a breath and bring everybody in together. And there's a lot of sharp minds in here that can go 100 miles an hour, but you don't want to look around and be alone. Take the time to go together.
I love it.
Thank you so much. Again, really appreciate it.